What's up everyone, Landon with LMR.com. Welcome to my detailed overview and installation on this GT350R brake upgrade kit from Ford Performance, designed for the 2015 to 2018 EcoBoost and GT Mustangs. When it comes to upgrading the braking performance on your S550 Mustang, most folks just consider a simple pad change or possibly just a pad and rotor change. However, if you're like us here at LMR and you're a tad on the crazy side when it comes to performance and modification, then you'll understand where I'm about to come from. The brake kit I have here is Ford Performance's GT350R brake upgrade kit. Now, in my opinion, this is like going to the fireworks stand and buying that really big box of fireworks that has everything you need to put on one hell of a show. Now, as far as what you're going to get in the kit, I'm going to start with the front components. Ford Performance provides the massive GT350R calipers. These bad boys are a 6-piston design, they're powder-coated red, and the brake pads are pre-installed. To bolt these calipers to the EcoBoost or GT spindles, billet aluminum adapters are included so you can properly do so. The front rotors are constructed from 2 different materials, with the outer section being iron and the inner section being cast aluminum to help shed a little bit of weight. They are cross-drilled and vented, which is going to help with heat dissipation, and the overall diameter measures in at 15.5 inches. Other smaller items for the front include specific brake hoses, caliper retaining bolts, banjo bolts, and of course, some crush washers. Moving to the rear components now, this kit includes new calipers, rotors, parking brake cables, parking brake assemblies, GT350 half shafts, GT350 knuckles, and of course, all the miscellaneous hardware for all of this cool stuff to properly work. The rear calipers are a 4-piston design, and like the front, they are powder-coated red with the brake pads already pre-installed. The rear rotors feature the same construction materials and design as the front, with the only exception being overall diameter. These are 15 inches across, and the machine recess is properly placed on the back side of the rotor so that the brake shoes properly engage. Each parking brake assembly is pre-built and ready to bolt directly to the provided GT350 knuckle. This particular knuckle is constructed from aluminum, with the only difference being the spherical bushings and the smaller holes for the caliper retaining hardware. To polish out the GT350R theme, Ford Performance provides the GT350 half shafts. These are going to be a decent upgrade over the factory half shafts found in the EcoBoost and GT Mustangs. The rear portion of this kit has its smaller items as well. These include new retaining bolts, banjo bolts, crush washers, and of course the parking brake cable brackets. If you own a convertible model, Ford Performance provides new bolts for the rear bracing because the factory bolts are torqued to yield. And of course, as far as fitment is concerned for this particular kit, it's going to work with EcoBoost and GT models only. Of course, you V6 guys, the spindle had a little bit different design. That's why, unfortunately, it will not work for you. All right, guys, so we're gonna go ahead and get this Ford Performance GT350R brake kit installed onto our 2015 Mustang GT. Before you begin, have on hand a good selection of tools, the correct brake fluid for your application, and a decent amount of patience. To start the install, go ahead and support the car via a lift or as high and as safe as you can on jack stands. Remove all 4 wheels. For this install, we're going to be starting in the rear. Lubricate the knuckle retaining nut. Loosen and remove the nut with an 1.25 inch socket. Remove the rubber grommet from the bracket. Now you can loosen and remove the 10mm bolts, securing the parking brake cable to the knuckle, the parking brake to the body, and the brake hose to sway bar end-link bracket. Position a drain pan underneath the caliper. Loosen and remove the 13mm banjo bolt. Be prepared for brake fluid to run out. Plug the brake hose, and then loop the hose out of the way. Depress the plastic clips on the parking brake cable to remove it from the bracket. Remove the eyelet from the hook on the caliper. Position the parking brake cable out of the way, as this will be removed later on in the install. Reinstall a lug nut with some sort of spacer to keep the rotor in place while you remove the caliper. Loosen and remove the 2 18mm caliper to knuckle retaining bolts. The caliper can now be removed from the car. Remove the lug nut spacer and then remove the rotor. Loosen and remove the 3 8mm bolts securing the dust shield to the knuckle. Remove the dust shield. This is optional, but having it out of the way will provide additional work room. Loosen and remove the 8mm bolt securing the wheel speed sensor to the knuckle. Remove the sensor and position it out of the way. Loosen but do not remove the 18mm vertical link to control arm bolt. Loosen the 15mm vertical link to knuckle bolt. Remove the nut with the locking tab. Loosen the 18mm toe link to knuckle bolt. For our application, we have an aftermarket toe link installed. Then remove the 21mm knuckle to lower control arm bolt. Remove the vertical link to knuckle bolt and swing the vertical link down and out of the way. Loosen the upper control arm to knuckle hardware. The nut is 18mm and the bolt head is 15mm. Leave the bolt in place. Go ahead and remove the toe link to knuckle bolt. Lubricate the splines on the half shaft. Reinstall the half shaft to knuckle retaining nut. You'll only want to thread this on a few turns. Use the socket and then strike the socket with a dead blow. This should press out the half shaft from the knuckle. If for some reason yours puts up a fight, you may have to use an alternative method to fully remove the half shaft from the knuckle. Once the half shaft is out, remove the last bolt, followed by the knuckle. Use a pry bar to dislodge the C-clip inside of the differential. Once positioned, quickly jolt the pry bar to dislodge the C-clip. Remove the half shaft from the differential. Very little fluid should run out, but have some rags ready just in case. Ensure that the C-clip came out with the old half shaft. Place the knuckle on a workbench. Loosen and remove the 4 15mm hub assembly to knuckle retaining bolts. These bolts can be thrown in the trash. Ford Performance provides new bolts. Remove the knuckle from the hub assembly. Clean away any dirt and debris from the hub assembly. Use a small wire brush to clean the splines. Apply anti-seize to the splines and any contact points on the hub assembly. Apply anti-seize to the front and back of the side-specific parking brake assembly. The driver's side is marked with an L and the passenger side is marked with an R. Position the brake assembly over the hub. Position the knuckle over the hub and parking brake assembly. This can only go on one way. Take 4 of the provided knuckle to hub assembly retaining bolts and install them into each hole. These new bolts are 18mm. Evenly tighten these down in a crisscross pattern. Then torque each bolt to 108 pound-feet working in a crisscross pattern. A pry bar will be needed to keep the knuckle from rotating. Set this aside. Place the half shaft with the larger shaft diameter on the workbench. Lubricate the splines with gear oil. This is the side, obviously, with the C-clip. Before installing the new shaft, thoroughly clean the axle housing and seal. Apply a thin film of gear oil to the lip of the seal. Position the half shaft into the differential. Fully seat the half shaft. Apply anti-seize to the outer splines. Before installing the new knuckle assembly, apply blue thread locking compound to the previously removed bolts. Install the knuckle onto the half shaft. Reinstall the knuckle to control arm bolt. Bring the knuckle up and then reinstall the vertical link to knuckle bolt. With the knuckle in position, align the upper control arm. Reinstall the bolt. Swing the toe link back into position and reinstall the hardware. Again, ours is aftermarket. Thread on the upper control arm to knuckle retaining nut. Use the 18mm open-end wrench and the 15mm socket to snug down this hardware. Reinstall the vertical link to knuckle nut with locking tab. Reinstall the 18mm vertical link to control arm bolt and loosely tighten. Loosely tighten the 21mm control arm to knuckle bolt. Torque this bolt to 203 pound-feet. Torque the toe link to knuckle bolt to 129 pound-feet. Torque the vertical link to control arm bolt to 129 pound-feet as well. Torque the vertical link to knuckle bolt to 76 pound-feet. Lastly, torque the upper control arm to knuckle nut to 76 pound-feet. Now you can install the half shaft to knuckle retaining nut. Position a pry bar in between the studs to keep the hub assembly from rotating. Torque this nut to 98 pound-feet. After that, rotate an additional 45 degrees. Locate the holes in the top of the knuckle that are right beside the vertical link. This is where the parking brake cable attaches. Threads need to be cut into the hole closest to the inside of the car. Use the previously removed bolt with the 10mm head. Position the bolt and then carefully thread it all the way in. After that, you can remove it. Now you need to thread the hole for the wheel speed sensor. This was the bolt with the 8mm head. Again, thread the hole closest to the inside of the car. With the threads cut, Locate the correct parking brake cable bracket as well as the correct hardware. These are not marked, but you will know right away if you have the wrong one. Pass the bolts through the bracket and knuckle. Make sure that the bolts are even with the caliper to knuckle mating surface. Place one of the rear rotors on your workbench. These are not side specific. Wipe the contact points of the rotor with brake clean. This includes the front, rear, and the recess for the parking brake shoes. Apply anti-seize to the face of the rear hub. Install the rotor onto the hub assembly. Hold it in place with the spacer and lug nut. Locate the side-specific caliper and remove the rubber plug. Remember, the bleeders always point up. Install the caliper onto the rotor. Align the bolt holes and then thread in each bolt by hand. Then you can torque each of these bolts to 85 pound-feet. Uncoil the brake hose. Take one of the supplied banjo bolts and slide a crush washer over the bolt. Remove the plug from the brake hose block. Pass the banjo bolt through the brake hose block and then slide on another crush washer. Thread the banjo bolt into the caliper by hand. The rear banjo bolt torques to 30 pound-feet. Wipe up any brake fluid. Reinstall the brake hose bracket to the sway bar end link with the previously removed bolt. Torque this bolt to 21 pound-feet. Go ahead and reinstall the wheel speed sensor. The small bolt needs to be torqued to 80 inch-pounds. Take the correct side parking brake cable and route it through the bracket. The driver's side is marked with an LH and the passenger side is marked with an RH. Hook the eyelet on the end of the cable through the lever on the parking brake assembly. Attach the parking brake cable spring clip to the parking brake cable bracket. Secure the cable bracket to the knuckle with the previously removed bolt. Torque this bolt to 21 pound-feet. Reattach the cable to the body and reinstall the previously removed bolt. This bolt torques to 21 pound-feet as well. Reinstall the rubber grommet. At this time, repeat these steps for the passenger side. Now we need to drop the exhaust down in order to properly route the parking brake cables. Lubricate the nuts on the 2 exhaust sleeves. Loosen each of the nuts with a 15mm socket. Pry back the tabs and pull the sleeves to the rear of the car. Position the mid-pipe away from the downpipes. Loosen and remove the 13mm bolts securing the middle exhaust hangers to the IRS cradle. Place a jack or something equivalent under the mid-pipe. Push up on each hanger to remove the hooks from the cradle. Bring the exhaust down and rest the mid-pipe on the jack or whatever you place there to support it. Now you can continue to remove the driver's side parking brake cable. Remove the 13mm retaining bolt, securing the next cable retaining bracket. After that, the next bracket is secured with a 10mm bolt. The bracket attached to the fuel tank strap is held in place with a 13mm nut. Locate the parking brake cable equalizer on the driver's side of the transmission tunnel. Depress the metal tabs on the parking brake spring clip. Then remove the eyelet from the equalizer. The driver's side cable is now free to come out. To help with installation of the new cables, move the adjusting nut back. This nut is 10mm. At this point, you can remove the passenger side cable. All of the steps are the same except for the bracket at the top of the transmission tunnel. Locate the 10mm bolt. Break it loose with a stubby ratcheting wrench. Then use a long 1/4 inch drive extension with a wobble socket to fully remove it. Now you can depress the metal tabs on the spring clip and pull out on the cable. Remove the eyelet from the equalizer and then the passenger side cable is free to come out. Route the new passenger side cable over the drive shaft. Slide the correct bracket over the fuel tank strap. Do this for the driver's side. Hook each of the eyelets into the equalizer. Start with the passenger side cable. Seat the spring clip into the metal bracket. Before you reinstall all the retaining hardware for the brackets, verify that each eyelet is still attached to the lever on the parking brake assembly. To set the parking brake preload, reinstall both rear wheels. Tighten the wheel against the rotor with a few lug nuts. With the rear wheels reinstalled, hop inside of the car and set the parking brake handle to the first click. Spin each wheel and verify that they spin freely. From underneath the car, tighten the parking brake cable adjustment nut. Spin each wheel again. The criteria you are trying to meet is as follows. The rear wheels do not spin freely and have resistance, and the rear wheels do not fully lock up. Once the criteria is met, you can remove the rear wheels. Reinstall the exhaust components, and that completes the assembly for the rear brakes. Moving to the front of the car, loosen the brake hose from the hard line with a 13mm flare nut wrench. Remove the 10mm retaining bolt, retaining the hose bracket to the frame rail. Immediately cap the line. Wipe up any brake fluid. Use a lug nut and spacer to hold the rotor in place. Loosen and remove the two 15mm caliper to spindle retaining bolts. Go ahead and remove the caliper from the car. Now you can remove the lug nut spacer and lug nut, followed by the rotor. Apply blue thread locking compound to the previously removed caliper to spindle retaining bolts. Position the caliper mounting bracket into place. The bracket itself will install on the outside edge of the spindle. The offset mounting holes for the new caliper will face towards the inside of the car. Install the previously removed bolts and torque them to 85 pound-feet. Apply anti-seize to the face of the hub. Place the side-specific rotor on a workbench. Be sure and reference the instructions for the correct side. Before installing the new rotor, wipe both sides with quality brake clean. Install the rotor onto the hub. Then use the spacer and lug nut to hold the rotor in place. Place the side-specific caliper and brake hose on a workbench. Remove the rubber plug from the caliper. Slide a crush washer over the banjo bolt. Pass the banjo bolt through the brake hose block, and then slide on another crush washer. Install the banjo bolt into the caliper and torque it to 35 pound-feet. Install two of the provided caliper retaining bolts into their respective holes. Position the new caliper over the new rotor. Use a T60 torque socket and torque each bolt to 136 pound-feet. Be sure and remove the lug nut and spacer. Remove the cap from the hard line and then quickly and carefully thread the line into the new brake hose. Thread it all the way down by hand. Position the bracket into the frame rail. Reinstall the bolt and torque it to 18 pound-feet. Now you can fully tighten the brake hose to hardline connection. Go ahead and wipe up any brake fluid. Now it's time to bleed the brakes. If you don't have a brake bleeding tool, you will need assistance from a friend to get this done. First, make sure the master cylinder is filled with the correct brake fluid. Start at the passenger rear caliper and remove the rubber bleeder caps. Place a piece of clear hose over the outside bleeder. Have your friend pump the brakes and hold. Open the bleeder and then close it. Pump the brakes again, open the bleeder, and then close it. Move to the inside bleeder and repeat the steps. The goal here is to push out any air that may have gotten into the system. You'll then move to the driver's side rear caliper. Repeat these steps and then check the fluid level in the master cylinder. Top it off with fluid before moving to the front. Next is the passenger side front caliper. The last caliper in the bleeding process is the driver's side front. Depending on personal preference, you may want to repeat these steps again in the same order. Reinstall the rubber bleeder caps. Once you feel comfortable with the bleeding process, be sure the master cylinder is topped off with the correct fluid. Reinstall the wheels and then get the car on the ground. Be sure and torque each lug nut. To properly bed or burnish the new pad and rotor, drive responsibly around town for a few miles. After that, you're all finished. All right guys, wrapping up the install, I can honestly say this kit is bad to the bone. If this is your first time doing this, reach out to a friend, family member, whoever that may have some mechanical experience and can help you get this done. Of course, there's always the option of you taking the car to your local speed shop or your Ford dealership. Now you're probably wondering what wheels are going to work and what wheels will not. I'm gonna keep this pretty simple for you guys. The front is going to retain the standard issue EcoBoost and GT offset. Now, as far as the rear is concerned, you cannot use a standard GT or EcoBoost offset wheel because it's going to push it out further than the fender. You'll have to use a wheel with a GT350 or GT350R offset. That way it brings the wheel back toward the inside of the car. No matter what, on all four corners, you'll have to run a wheel that is 19 inches in diameter or larger. To see more how-to and review videos covering industry-leading products, be sure and subscribe to our YouTube channel, like this video, and don't forget to turn on notifications. While you're at it, be sure and check out our other videos, and don't forget to shop lmr.com for all things 1979 present Mustang, and of course, SVT Light.